Hello and welcome to this week's edition of TRP News. I'm your host, James Andre, and I want to thank you for joining me this week. We'll start with an update on the Hillary Clinton campaign for President of the United States. This past week, Clinton and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, reported on Friday they earned more than $25 million in speaking fees since January of last year, 2014. The income was reported on a personal financial disclosure statement filed with the Federal Election Commission. This is a regular filing that's required of candidates, although it does not have to be exact. The numbers do not have to be exact. There can be a range of incomes reported, so this is an estimate, $25 million made by the Clintons. Some have seized on Clinton's wealth as evidence that she is too closely tied to corporations and that her support of the middle class will be somewhat less than enthusiastic. Clinton is currently staying with her strategy of focusing on voters and limiting press availability and press appearances. This has been seen by some as a point of criticism. Why isn't she talking to the press? Why isn't she answering questions? Why isn't she responding to issues that are in the news currently? Republican presidential hopefuls gathered in Iowa, and they took jabs at Clinton for not fielding more questions from the press, as they have been answering many questions and trying to gain some notoriety and some media attention. Among those criticizing Clinton were Carly Fiorina, Rand Paul, and Jeb Bush. In a twist to the criticism that's become this twist is becoming ever more sophisticated as every election cycle passes. Conservative groups are using social media to make posts designed to be spotted and shared by liberals. Stephen Law, president of American Crossroads, a conservative organization, a technological organization, said the goal is to erode her natural core of support. Quote, "It can diminish enthusiasm for Hillary among the base over time. And if you diminish enthusiasm, lukewarm support can translate into lackluster fundraising and perhaps diminished turnout down the road." Law also said, "We wear these little bracelets, WWEWD," he joked, referring to what would Elizabeth Warren do. So they are focused on this. Zach Moffitt, a co-founder of Targeted Victory, who handled Romney's digital operation and has worked with groups like American Rising and American Crossroads, said you might start looking at union households, you might start looking at Bernie Sanders' core of support. So one thing that happened with this is the AFL-CIO, a union organization, sent to its more than 60,000 followers on Twitter a tweet, an American Rising tweet praising its president, Richard Trumka, the president of AFL-CIO, for a speech challenging Clinton on economic issues. And they, hours later, took it down, saying it was a mistake. So this is a conservative group that crafted this tweet and praising the AFL-CIO, a union, and it was picked up by liberals and the union itself and promoted and retweeted it, and it's an effort to diminish Hillary Clinton's support. So this is what these Republican organizations are doing. As Clinton was traveling through Vegas, liberal Democrats, as identified by Targeted Victory in the Las Vegas area, saw a video pop up into their Facebook news feeds highlighting recent news reports about foreign contributions to the Clinton Foundation. Shared by America Rising, the conservative group, it received over 6,300 views, mostly from people who would never follow a group like American Rising in social media. So the right is still bringing up Benghazi, emails, and the Clinton Foundation. while voices purporting to be on the left are criticizing her for not taking a stand over TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Liberal groups are calling the question of TPP and her position on it a key or a pass-fail position, and saying that her support for TPP would be wrong. Well, Clinton does not need to speak on everything that comes up, okay? This is my opinion on this matter. She does not need to respond to every issue that comes up in the news. Her main job is to win and to keep that White House out of the hands of Republicans. There will be plenty of time between now and the election, which is over a year and a half away, more than a year and a half away, for her to answer a lot of questions and for her positions to become clear. Not only that, as I've told you before, it's not about her as an individual, her positions as an individual. It's about how she responds to her party and how she responds to her constituency, to the people who get her elected to office. That's the real question. How is she going to take the issues that progressives consider important? How is she going to consider them? And how much weight is she going to give progressives' opinions about policy? The last thing she needs to do is be aggressive for no reason. This is just a sort of a trap. So she comes out strong on one position or strong on another. She's already winning. Why would she come out and sort of just make herself a target before she has to? She's winning. She's on her way to the White House. She doesn't need to change anything, do anything, speak out, scream about the issue of the day. It's just not necessary. She needs to do what she's doing, get in touch with the voters, get in touch with her constituency, figure out what they need, what's going on in the country, and figure out how she can relate to it in order to bring that to the White House and her policy decisions. So progressives need to stay focused, ignore this bait from the right, and stop putting their entire agenda in one candidate or one political office. I've been warning for a few weeks now that on TPP, and things are only going to get worse, okay? So I've been telling you over and over again, be careful who you're getting in bed with on these criticisms. There is a lot of this going on out there. These are not fellow progressives who are saying, oh, yes, Elizabeth Warren is right. No, these are Republicans, these are conservatives who are attempting to distract you, to trick you, to get you to criticize your leaders, your president, your potential president, your president in waiting, Hillary Clinton. So this is a sort of disinformation, misinformation campaign that's going on, and you have to be careful. Use your brain, use your logic. What is really behind this criticism? And I see a lot of this, and see especially over the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You know, a lot of these things just don't even make sense. I read an article the other day. Elizabeth Warren is right. And then they quoted 5 people saying how she wasn't right. And then they said, well, it's not about TPP, it's about the European trade deal. But then they say, well, Obama's fighting all those problems too. So this article saying Elizabeth Warren's right then says she's absolutely wrong and provides all the evidence. Yet the rhetoric, the gist of the article says that she's correct, when the substance of the article says she's wrong. So we have to be careful of that. We're careful of this criticism and where it's coming from. And another big thing I talked about this weeks ago, and I probably should mention it more, is if you are a progressive, you are a liberal, stop posting about these crazy right-wing people and everything they say or do, okay? You're just giving them a platform. Don't post every nutty thing that comes up. You're wasting your bandwidth. You're giving them bandwidth. You're wasting your energy, and you're just giving them a platform and more attention. It doesn't even matter because, look, you disagree with them, and you're preaching to the choir number one. So you're not converting anyone who thinks the way you do. But the people who disagree with you are looking at that and cheering. You're keeping that brand, Paul Ryan or Rand Paul, or Marco Rubio, you're keeping that brand in the public spotlight. So you're actually advertising you're you're not energizing your allies. You're advertising to the people you're contesting. So stop posting about these people. Stop bashing people. Also, this isn't about who you can bash. This is not about right-wing tactics, about who's lying and they're all just politicians. This is about promoting a progressive agenda, okay? This is about pushing for the things we know that need to happen. So let's promote our candidates and our agenda, and let's not waste time trying to tear down theirs. Remember, when you argue with fools, they'll drag you down to their level and beat you with experience. Okay? So that's what's going on with Hillary Clinton. Also, in this past week, Congress last Thursday sent President Barack Obama a bill to give lawmakers the power to review and potentially reject a nuclear deal with Iran. The House overwhelmingly passed the measure 400 to 25 votes. Presidential spokesman Josh Earnest said on Thursday that Obama would indeed, as reported here, would indeed sign the bill into law. The Iran nuclear legislation would bar the president from waiving any sanctions for at least 30 days while Congress considered any final deal. So even if Congress rejects this deal, there is still executive action that the president can take in order to waive sanctions. And along with, now there's sanctions from European partners as well, and those could be lifted as well. So there's executive sanctions, there's congressional sanctions, there's European sanctions. So even if Congress doesn't approve the deal, the president can still lift some sanctions, Europe can lift some sanctions, and there still can be a deal to move forward, even without congressional approval. So that tells you the weight of this legislation. It's not very weighty. It's a, feel-good measure that really doesn't accomplish that much. And on another note on that, last week also, Dems withdrew their support for a defense spending bill, saying the committee increased spending and skirted automatic spending caps imposed by Congress in 2011, the infamous sequester. They did this by padding the emergency warfighting fund, which is not affected by the caps. So there's across-the-board caps on spending in the federal government, and what the Republicans have done is they want to increase military spending but not increase anything else. So they found a fund that is excluded from the across-the-board caps, and they are trying to stuff more money into that. And Democrats are saying, no, that you have spending caps, and you have to honor them. You can't find a way around them. And what the Democrats are saying is that, well, when it comes to military spending, you want to find ways around the caps, but when it comes to domestic spending or spending to help people, suddenly it's like, oh, there's got to be offsets and trade-offs, and we have to stay under the cap. And one of those things, we'll talk about it in a little bit, is things like Amtrak funding. So, meanwhile, we are engaged in military conflicts in Yemen, Iraq, and this last week, the U.S. military also conducted an operation against ISIS in Syria, killing one of their top commanders, and still no legislation, no debate, or authorization for military action from Congress at all. So we've got a nearly toothless Iran nuclear deal legislation that was passed with much hullabaloo, but yet we have military forces engaging in military actions around the globe, and Congress has done nothing to weigh in on this, nothing to authorize it or even question what's happening. And I'll add a note, this is despite the administration and President Obama urging Congress to weigh in, to debate these issues, to take a vote, and they just will not do it. So that's what's happening with that right now. And that brings us to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, our favorite topic here at TRP News. There's just ongoing developments here, and especially this last week, you probably heard a lot about what happened. So we're just going to give you a little recap here. So this past week, once again, the media narrative was Warren versus Obama, and the prize for the prize fight was TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So after much overhyped reporting last week, and many people cheered as Senate Democrats failed to open debate on last Tuesday on fast-track legislation. So a lot of people thought they had a victory, even though the vote was billed as a test vote and was not really a significant vote. Many lightly informed observers and critics of TPP rejoiced when it failed to get the necessary 60 votes to open debate on the legislation. The elation was short-lived, however, as only a day later a deal was announced between the Senate Republicans and Democrats, which would allow the the fast-track legislation to move forward. So the Senate then voted last Thursday to begin debate on the package. So the 60 votes needed were reached. And now this last Sunday on ABC's This Week, McConnell said of fast-track legislation, yes, we'll pass it. We'll pass it later this week. So that's as of this publication, as of this broadcast, the video posting, that sometime this week you can expect fast track to pass the Senate. Paul Ryan says Paul Ryan is the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, commented on the likelihood of passage in the House, saying, "We will have the votes. We're doing very well." So apparently it's passing the Senate this week and it's going to go to the House, where it is expected to pass. So, as I've been predicting for weeks now, this is looks like it's going to go through, and it's looking ever more likely as we go along. And despite the misguided criticism and deceptive rhetoric, there is more support for this legislation than is evident from listening to the loudest voices. So I was warning you folks about this. If those of you who are critics of this, I just hate to tell you, there's a lot of people screaming and shouting, and unfortunately what they're saying doesn't make a lot of sense. And unfortunately what it's doing is also making it look like there's a lot more opposition than there is. You're going to find out a lot of Dems are going to vote for this because it is, as far as I can tell, the right thing to do. You can yell and scream, and I've been getting called names online for weeks now, corporate shill, and a wolf in sheep's clothing, a liar, and a lot of different names. But I'm telling you, I've read on this and read on this to the point where I told you a couple of weeks ago I'm just sick of talking about it, and this is just a non-issue, people. So we can't maintain the status quo. Trade relationships need to be defined and redefined over time. Things change. Knee-jerk opposition to any trade deal benefits no one. We have to get over the myth of the destructiveness of trade deals. This mythology, and I've gone over this, and I've shown you the figures and the charts, has little basis in fact. I showed you last week how the U.S. economy has been transitioning to a service economy for 130 years. This trend didn't just start in the last few decades. It didn't start since NAFTA. 130 years, since the 1880s, we've been trending towards a service economy. Manufacturing industry in this country was artificially boosted during World War II by government control and investment in industry. So now we have Republicans blocking all efforts to make similar investments, and that is the real problem, the real driver behind the weakening of the middle class, okay? So we need to make those investments. There has to be investments in domestic investment. That's what drives the economy. That's what boosts the middle class. Don't be distracted. Don't buy a ticket to the sideshow. Forget about TPP, and let's focus on tax policy, infrastructure investment, renewable energy investment, and education, okay? These are the issues that really matter to a progressive agenda and that will really help Americans move forward. And speaking of infrastructure investment, this past week, a Washington to New York train speeding on a curve crashed outside of Philadelphia. 8 people were killed and a few hundred were injured. A day later, Republicans blocked an attempt to increase funding for the passenger rail system, Amtrak. A system that would automatically control train speeds was due to be implemented by the end of this year, but there's some talk of Congress moving the deadline to 2020. In a previously scheduled vote, the House panel passed a Republican spending bill on a 30 to 21 party line vote that would provide $1.14 billion for Amtrak, which is $262 million less than the level for the current fiscal year. This measure now goes to the House for full consideration. So this was the day after the deadly Amtrak crash, and this funding bill went up for a vote in the committee, and the committee passed it, although the Dems tried to raise the level of funding for Amtrak. Republicans refused, criticized, and chastised the Dems for trying to politicize the Amtrak accident, and subsequently passed forward the legislation to the House. As you should know, all spending bills must originate with the House of Representatives, so that's why it's going to the House first. And we have a situation in this country right now where, for example, some bridges like the Portal Bridge near New York, for instance, are more than a century old in desperate need of replacement. The curve where the accident happened outside of Philadelphia has now been scheduled to have this technology that's supposed to be implemented by the end of this year, which is a control technology to prevent the train, which, as it turns out, was speeding. I think the speed limit was 50 miles per hour, and the train was going 106 or 107 miles per hour into this curve, and that is what seems to be the cause of the accident. Well, this new technology would prevent that sort of accident from happening by automatically controlling the train speed, but we still have a lot of infrastructure problems like this 100-year-old bridge and other 100-year-old and very aged components to the system. We have the Acela train, which is a train run by Amtrak, and it's a high-speed rail system, but it's limited in some areas to 30 miles an hour. It can't go through a tunnel, a 100-year-old tunnel outside of Boston, and it can't speed through there at 150 miles an hour. There's just not the infrastructure. So 10 minutes it goes 150 miles an hour, and then for 20 minutes it goes 30 miles an hour. So that's the kind of issue we're having with our infrastructure. Excuse me. Ray LaHood, the Republican former member of Congress who served as President Obama's first Secretary of Transportation, said much of the blame rested with lawmakers who came to Washington from states where Amtrak does not run. They think Amtrak, quote, is just an easy place to cut. So that's one issue we have, and a lot of people are talking about this, that the major service, I think it's 30 million last year, that Amtrak served are on the coast. So they're in Democratic blue states, blue areas, and they are not in red states, so that the Republicans are not interested in spending large amounts of money to help these states. Also, another issue that has come up is that there is no capital fund for this type of infrastructure. So what a capital fund does is basically you just add money to this account for repairs and redevelopment and refurbishment, and say it's we'll just give it a number, $100 million, and then that money can just be spent on whatever needs to be done. Well, the problem is that people, and especially politicians, like to see a return on that investment. So you authorize $100 million or $100 billion, and there's no short-term gain. That there's no return seen for another decade or two. So by the time a lot of these people will be out of office, and they've just put a big dent in the budget, although it's relatively, you can call it a big dent or not, but there's no immediate return. It's not like saying here's $30 million for this stadium, or here's $30 million for this park, or this airport, So there's another issue there, and also there's a person who studied this said, even if you did have a capital fund, you may end up with even more excess spending because people would be trying to authorize things under that fund that weren't necessarily infrastructure related or necessary to happen at that time or under that schedule. So Boehner was, as I said, was one of the people critical about saying that Dems were trying to politicize the accident. He said they're saying funding was the cause of this accident. And he said, quote, well, obviously it's not about funding. The train was going twice the speed limit. Adequate funds were there. No money's been cut from rail safety. And the House passed a bill earlier this spring to reauthorize Amtrak and authorize a lot of these programs. So he's saying the money's there, it's just not being done. And analyst Robert Fuentes of the Brookings Institute think tank said Amtrak systems infrastructure has never seen comprehensive investment program. That's what I'm talking about, another way of saying a capital investment fund. So he's saying it's never seen it. In the Northeast Corridor, quote, there's a need for basic rehabilitation and maintenance assistance. The system is old and it's reaching the end of its useful life after limping along through patches. So regardless of who's correct about last week's funding vote, it is clear that the Amtrak rail system and the nation's infrastructure in general needs assistance. Attention. Roads, bridges, railways, sewer systems, air traffic control systems in many places have become outdated, obsolete, and in some cases outright dangerous. Investment in infrastructure is one of the things progressives should be pushing hard for as a matter of safety, and not only safety, as a matter of economic opportunity. So I told you before last week, and when we talked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all the manufacturing jobs that we're supposed to have, but the quote I keep hearing is giant sucking sound, the giant sucking sound. Well, it's not really true. As I told you last week, during World War II, the United States was the manufacturer of over half of all goods in the entire world. So this is not sustainable, and it was a result of government control of the economy, the manufacturing sector, and the labor sector. So to get that kind of stimulus, to get that kind of control, to get those kind of jobs, we have to make an investment in another area. And no one wants it to be war. But that's the way it's working out now because, as I told you earlier, Republicans are finding ways around spending caps on military, but they're not finding a way around spending caps on domestic programs. So what we have is only a military-based stimulus. Number one, yes, we have a large military, and yes, it's a huge fund, but it's not enough, and it's not domestic. And also, let me tell you, we all know about Dick Cheney, right? Well, this money is going into the pockets of a very few people. So all this military investment, there's only so many heads of Boeing. There's only so many heads of these private military contractors. So this is something we have to turn around. This is the real issue. This is what's depleting the middle class. This is what's making these jobs disappear, is this lack of investment in our society, in the underpinnings, in the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, transportation. Transportation is a national security issue. If anyone who this is just a no-brainer, okay? Even when it comes to military, you have to, in wartime or a military conflict, one of the main keys, and any military person will tell you, is to be able to move goods quickly from one place to another. Not only goods, but equipment. So transportation is huge. If we don't even have a train system that can quickly move things from one thing to another, now I'm not saying there's going to be a war happening, but who knows? But the point is that part of that, it's not even just for the military, but being able to move goods quickly and efficiently is just an economic benefit to everyone. And not only that, it's just an ongoing investment. It's not something you can just throw $30 billion at one year. oh, we funded Amtrak. Well, this is an ongoing issue, especially when you let it get to, a deficit where basically the entire system needs to be replaced. It's an ongoing thing. There has to be serious, continuous investment. Otherwise, we're going to be playing catch up the entire time, and we're never going to be in a position to reap the benefits of a robust transportation and infrastructure. So progressives, focus on these issues: infrastructure investment, renewable energy, education. These are the things that really we have to be pushing for, and we can't be distracted by these issues of the day and who donated to Hillary Clinton and how many, or the Clinton Foundation, and how many emails she deleted from her private server. These are just all distractions. Let's focus on the big issues: tax policy. Let's focus, education. So that's really where we need to be. And this Amtrak issue has been going on for years and years and years. And let me tell you, there's more cries now about privatizing it. And you know what privatization does? Again, it's the same situation. That's why they're privatizing the military, and that's what I'm talking about. These private military contractors, they end up taking your tax dollars, and it goes into the hands of a few people that profit off of these military conflicts. So you privatize the train, 30 million passengers. They took in something like, I don't remember if it's $1 or $2 billion. No, it might have even been $3 billion last year. And they want to take that money and put it in the hands of one private company or a few private companies. And who's going to benefit? The workers don't benefit. Remember, we already have a problem with CEO pay. So what actually is going to happen is they privatize this train, and suddenly someone will be able to turn a profit, And where's that profit going to come from? You're going to pay for it. So let's keep focused, folks. Infrastructure investment, huge, important deal, and a lot bigger deal than what trade deal is being negotiated. These are domestic policy problems, not international trade problems. And that's where we need to be focused. We need to be pushing for these progressive issues, the progressive agenda. Finally, this week, Indiana. Just want to give you an update on the HIV outbreak there and the status of Scott County and the needle exchange program and what Governor Pence is doing to deal with all that. The HIV outbreak in Scott County, Indiana has reached 153 cases. And as I told you a couple of weeks ago, this is predictable. It's going to keep growing. It's going to spread until more aggressive action is taken. That's just the way these things go. There's no doubt about it. So we went from, I think, 86 when we first started, and I first started reporting on this story. Now we're up to 153, nearing double. The town of Austin in Scott County has a population of 4,200 and now has a higher incidence of HIV than any country in sub-Saharan Africa. This is according to Dr. Thomas Frieden, the Center for Disease Control's director. Quote, they've had more people infected with HIV through injection drug use than all of New York City last year. So 4,200, population of 4,200 has more HIV infection due to IV drug use than all of New York City, the city of 8 million people. So treating those infected with the outbreak, according to Frieden, will cost $100 million. $100 million. The outbreak prompted Governor Mike Pence to go against his conservative ideology and issue a waiver on the state's prohibition against needle exchange programs for Scott County. And I told you about that, and the waiver was for 30 days, and it was actually extended by Governor Pence. So they still have an ongoing needle exchange program, albeit with some issues with law enforcement. The needle exchange program requires registration, and law enforcement saying that we're encouraging people to sign up for the program is arresting people who aren't registered under the needle exchange program. So there are some issues with the adoption and the trust of IV drug users. and their use of the needle exchange program, but it is in place. So 2 weeks ago also, Pence, I told you about this law that was up for consideration. He signed the new law allowing for needle exchanges in other counties. And I told you about this. There's several steps that a county would have to go through, or a town, in order to establish a needle exchange program in that town. However, many call the requirements for approval of the new exchanges overly stringent. And one of the main requirements, and I told you about this a couple weeks ago, is that they have to prove that there's an outbreak. So they can't see one coming and establish a needle exchange program. There already has to be a problem before you can have a needle exchange program. You already have to be literally in an epidemic before the state of Indiana will allow you to do one of the most effective things around to stop it. So although, now we at least have an opportunity, but a lot of critics say that there's just so much rigmarole, and I told you before about how some of these places do not even have the funding to test properly. They don't have the funding to jump through all the hoops. So, the way this outbreak is growing, it's just a little too late. So hopefully, and the CDC is reporting that there's a lot of places around the country, and particularly in the South, that are at risk for this type of situation. So until this conservative ideology fully meets reality, we are looking at most likely a lot more cases and a lot more of this type of situation. And this is just a prime example, folks, of this ideology, this ridiculous conservative love of prohibition, which is proven time and time again not to be effective. They didn't learn from alcohol prohibition. They didn't learn from marijuana prohibition. They're not learning from needle prohibition and drug prohibition in general, and yet they still adhere to it for some reason. I really don't know. It just defies logic, and what are you going to say? Basically, it seems to be just a lack of tolerance for any other lifestyle but what they believe to be correct. So, and I'm not one to say I appreciate IV drug use, but I'll tell you this, whatever works to make sure that, the blood supply is not contaminated, that there's not HIV outbreaks in public schools, then that's what I think should be done. So, Indiana will Indiana will allow you to bar the door after the horse is out of the barn. As for the town of Austin, they will be getting an HIV clinic that will provide free medical care to patients without health insurance. Austin Mayor Douglas Campbell said the city and its only physician have entered into a partnership with the Los Angeles-based AIDS Healthcare Foundation for the clinic, which will be open in a few weeks. So that's a positive note there. There will be getting some help, some treatment, free treatment and assistance that the counties and municipalities are struggling to provide on their own. And once again, we'll keep you updated as that story goes on. All right, and that's it for this week, TRP News. I'm James Andre. Thank you very much for joining me this week, and I hope you found it informative, and we will see you again next week.